Good morning, everyone. My name is Rich Sloma. Welcome to today's New York State Archives presentation of What Does the Genealogist Want from You and How to Provide It. Today's presenter is David Lowry. David is the head of local government services at the New York State Archives. The session is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. If you have any questions for Dave, please type them in the chat box to the right side of your screen, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. And at this point in time, I will change Dave's role to presenter.
Okay, thank you so much, Rich. And good morning, everybody. I'm so glad you could join us today for What Does a Genealogist Want from You and How to Provide It. Even though this does center around one of my favorite subjects, genealogy, it's really not from the genealogist point of view. This webinar is meant to help you good folks out there who have to provide the research services to the genealogist. We're going to focus on how we can make that action so much easier for you. So let's get started. First thing we want to do is take a look at today's agenda, what we're hoping to do. First is just to quick explain why the genealogist wants to consult your records. Okay. Then we're going to look at how you can make your records much more accessible, right? That's going to be the key to providing these services. How to provide research services. And finally, we'll discuss where you can get more help in doing these things. So let's get started. So some of you probably think this sometimes, when you get contacted by genealogists, it's like, why are they still bugging me, right? Isn't everything online? Shouldn't it be easy? They shouldn't have to come to me. But we do have some issues here in New York State, especially, which means people are still probably going to come to you quite often. And one is that many New York State local government records are not online, unlike in many other states. And I'm going to show you an example of that in a moment. Um, Many genealogy sites can be expensive. There are some good free ones like Family Search, but if you're an Ancestry member, I could tell you because I'm a member, it's if you want the full package, it's over $400 a year. So not cheap. They need more than one record to prove an identity or a relationship, or they may just be having trouble finding their ancestors, say, in more common records like a census, and then they have to come to you. One good example is the 1890 census was destroyed in a fire. So oftentimes people will look for records to substitute for that. So remember a moment ago I was mentioning that, well, a lot of New York records, local government records, are not online. So what I wanted to do was just to show you a comparison here. Now, one thing to mention is there are some good county level records online in New York, especially deeds, some court records, things like that, but especially municipal records, for some reason, are difficult to find. So what I did here is I did a comparison between two small cities. One here in New York, okay, the city of Amsterdam, which is in Montgomery County. Okay, that one's on your left, you can see here. And on your right is the small city of Lowell in Middlesex County, Massachusetts. Now you can see here on the Family Search site, which is where I got this information, when you search for records for Amsterdam, New York, you will get some hints. But when you look at these, one thing you'll notice is they're actually not municipal records. So they've got some census records, right? But those are federal. They've got church histories and church records, not government records, though. City directories, not government records, obviously histories. And the one where it says vital records, where you think you might find some actual government records, um, this is just vital records. You can see your death and marriages that were recorded in their local newspaper called the Amsterdam Recorder, right? So there's no actual municipal records. Now, excuse me, let's compare that to Lowell, Massachusetts. Okay, you can see here you've got the Journal of the Board of Aldermen. Well, that's a local government record, right? Ordinances and resolutions, definitely. Evaluation books. These are actually tax records. Okay. Uh, Proceedings of town meetings. You could just see an actual vital records created by, well, formerly the town, now city of Lowell, Massachusetts. So again, if people cannot go to a site like, say, Family Search and find your municipal records online, well, guess what? They're going to be picking up the phone and they're going to be calling you. Another big problem New York State has is a lack of vital records. Um, in New York State, actually going all the way back to the colony of not just New York, but New Netherlands, when it was a Dutch colony, um, there were actually vital record laws passed by the first colonial governments and then eventually the state government. Here's the thing, locals that sort of ignored those laws and never were very consistent in recording those vital records, those vital events. For those of you who may not know what that term means, I'll just quick tell you that's your birth, death, and marriage records. Okay. It really wasn't until about 1914 when the state really cracked down and the locals consistently started recording those records. Okay. Um, and those are a big record series that genealogists rely on. So if it's difficult for them to get those vital records, they have to turn to other local government records to try to fill in the gaps there. Another thing is New York State vital record laws are very, very strict. You can see there I stress the word very because they are very strict compared to other states. Again, you can go to a site like Family Search and you could just, um, look at records from, say, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, all these states actually have their records right online. You can search for them, and it'll just bring up a digital image of the actual record. Now, what's odd here in New York is this is also true of New York City vital records. The city over the past decade has scanned and indexed millions of the vinyl records, and you can go to the New York City Archives website and you can actually search and again just get a digital image of the original record. For the state, that's not true. Um, so, like I said, people they have to find substitute records. So they may be looking through, have to look through deed books to look for mentions of relationships between people, look at your tax assessment records, things like that. Also important to keep in mind with New York State is so many Americans can trace their genealogy through New York State. If they had New England ancestors who moved west, at one point they came across upstate New York. A lot of them settled here for a generation or two. Some of them may have stayed permanently. A lot of them eventually moved west across the country. And also, as many of you know, New York City was a huge, huge place where in the late 19th and early 20th century, tons of immigrants, mostly from Europe, would come through places like Ellis Island. So that's another reason why you're probably going to get a lot of genealogy requests because so many people can trace their genealogy through New York State. So, what kind of records are they looking for? Some of you are probably familiar with this, but if you're looking at the county level, deeds and mortgages are a biggie. Other land records like maps, assessment maps, things like that. Other tax and assessment records, court records are a biggie. And if they exist, chattel mortgages tend to be very popular with genealogists. Municipal records, vital records, of course, as we were discussing, that's a biggie where they do exist. Minutes, the tax and assessment again, and property history file, things like permit files. Just some of the records a genealogist will be looking for. So From your point of view, where do you start, right? If you want to provide these services, research services to genealogists, you want to make your records more accessible, where should you start? Well, the first thing, of course, is always to gather information, right? You want to, make those data-driven decisions and see what you have. So you want to do things like gather information from colleagues, right? So you may know, let's, for example, say you're the town clerk. So, okay, you know what the genealogist wants from your department, maybe, but maybe you don't know that they're actually going to other departments. So talk to other department heads and say, hey, what kind of requests do you get from records? What record series? How often do people request them? Also, your municipal historian should be a big help in this and identifying, the kinds of records that genealogists may want to use. And you could always turn towards a local historical society or genealogist society. We have loads of local and regional genealogical societies here in New York State. And I could tell you, I'm sure they would all be, happy to give you a hand if you go to them and say, hey, I'm looking to make my records more accessible and identify what records genealogists, like the best and want to use the most. Could you give me a hand? And I can assure you they would be happy to. And then do an inventory, a survey of your records, just to get an idea of how much you have, what time periods they cover, things like that, because that's going to be important when you start doing things like creating descriptions of your records, creating holding lists, and things like that. So these are going to be your next steps then, is making the records more accessible. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through each one of these points on the slide one by one. So the first you can see is to create listings and finding aids, to index records, create transcripts. You could reformat the records. In some cases, but we'll talk about this in more detail, maybe even relocate the records and then create research policies and a research space for researchers. So a list of holdings, what would that look like? So you might want to do something like this. Actually, give you an example here on this slide, and then put that information on your website. So you can see here, this is very high level stuff, right? It's not giving the researcher a ton of detail, but at least he knows what kind of records you have and what time periods they cover. So you can see here, minutes 1817 to the present, okay, tax records 1843 to the present. But it's also, if there are gaps in your record, you want to record that. So if the person is looking for tax records from 1871, they can say, oh, darn, I'm unlucky. They don't actually have that year. Um, Birth records, 1856 to the present. And you can see here the purpose of that, of course, would be is then if this information is accessible on your website, right? Because that's the first thing most researchers are going to do is go to your website. If they don't find this kind of information, that's when they're going to pick up the phone and call you or send you an email, something like that. Now, here's an actual list of holdings from our friends in Albany County. And this was actually taken from a pamphlet that the county had created years ago. And you could see here, Albany County obviously has lots of really good historical records for you to use. And this is just one small part of it that I'm showing you here. There's actually a lot more. But again, you could see, it doesn't give a ton of information about the records other than the name of the record series and what dates it covers. But again, this is a really good starting point for a researcher who could go and at least get an idea of what kind of records you may have, what time periods they cover. And again, if they have this information, they don't have to bug you. So finding aids, okay. So finding aids, kind of like those list of holdings I was just showing you, but much more detailed. And I'm going to show you an example in a moment. But generally, what it's going to tell you is who created the record, its general purpose, the content of it, what kind of information is in there, the format of it. So is it paper, microfilm, digital imaging, both, all of them, maybe just one of them, uh, what dates again that'll cover, and the quantity, meaning, how much is there of it. So let's take a look at this. So this is a finding aid again from Albany County. This is a finding aid to the court records that was written back in the 1990s, and you can see here it gives a very high level of detail, right? Not like those holdings lists that just give you the name of the series and the dates. It gives you a lot of information. So you can see here the mayor's court. So the mayor's court replaced the court of Albany, Rensselaerwick, and Schenectady in 1686 when English became the official administrative language of the colony of New York, right? It was a city court that held civil jurisdiction, although it did begin to hear some minor criminal cases, etc. So then you could see here there's a more of a detailed description of the record. So these are minute books from 1686 to 1866. And you can see here, then it says not inclusive, right? So the person knows there's going to be gaps in the records. There's 16 volumes. That's your quantity. The arrangement is chronological, right? So when they go to use the record, they're going to know it's not alphabetical, it's chronological, so a bit more difficult to use. The agency origin, they came from the Albany County Clerk's office, and then it gives you more of a description that they're handwritten and available on microfilm. So, the handwritten part, this is important, especially for people who may have trouble reading old handwriting, but at least they know what they're going to be dealing with, right? And then it gives more of a description. These 16 volumes cover the years 1760 to 1866. Then it's telling you that 1686 to 1760 are actually in the Albany Common Council minutes. So then you would know to go there. But you could see here by these descriptions, um, the researcher is getting a lot of detail. So he's going to know, okay, is this record series going to be useful for me, right? And gives them other hints. So he will see here that these records before 1686 were not even in English, right? They would have been in Dutch since New York started out as a Dutch colony. Okay, again, important information for the researcher to know. So that's an example of what a finding aid might look like. So indexing the records. You know, this is, can be time consuming, but it's a relatively easy one to do. And of course, it will allow you and the researcher to easily locate those records. And it could be a simple, just alphabetical listing, or it could be a database. So again, I'm going to show you some examples here. So this is from the Warren County website. Warren County, if you're not familiar with it, that's where the Lake George region is. And so you can see here what they did is they created an index to a jail record book. So you can see here it covers a relatively short period of time, right? So there's not going to be a ton of names in it. So what the county decided to do, instead of trying to, just create a fancy database for it, since there weren't that many names, they just created a simple alphabetical listing, right? Something very simple to do. So again, if you had ancestors in Warren County around this time period. Maybe you're curious, did they ever get in trouble with the law? And you could look, and not only that, but you can see here again, the researcher can say, hey, I want to find this record from, let's see, Henry Bateman. Okay, he was my ancestor, and he's on page 88, right? So now the folks who work at Warren County, they know where to go to get that particular record. They don't need to search for it themselves because the researcher actually found the record and can tell you exactly what page it is on. So this is from going back to our friends at Albany County. What they did is they created a database to naturalization records, very popular with genealogists for obvious reasons. Um, However, they've got a ton of them, right? So a simple alphabetical listing, that's not going to work, right? If you've got a ton of names that need to be recorded. So what they did is they did create a database. You could see here. So if you were to go to the Albany County website, this is what you'd see. This is just a screenshot, obviously. So to find some records, I just put in, what I knew would be a very common name, William Smith. Then I hit search, and then it gives me a listing of all the William Smiths here. So now you can also, let's see, we'll go back here. You can see if you knew the nation of origin, say, which you probably would, or if you have an idea of what municipality in Albany County they were living with at the time, you could add that to narrow down your search, right? So if I put in, say, Germany here, because I knew my William Smith was German, right? You could see it might just give you this William Smith here from Germany, um, who came over and was naturalized in 1848. Okay, um, so you could see how that works. And again, you could see here it tells you the book and the page number. So now the staff at Albany County, if you requested a copy of that record, they can just go right to the book and the page and they can get it easily. So again, you could see here how, putting in this upfront work of creating this database, um, yeah, it's a lot of work up front, but once it's done and online, over the years, it's going to save those folks from Albany County a lot of time because now they don't actually have to do that physical research, right? Before that, if somebody said, "Hey, I'm looking for this naturalization, some such and such a time period, here's the person's name," the staff would then have to do all that searching. So they've really cut back on that time. Transcripts are a great idea for those old handwritten records, right? So obviously because they're printed, they're easy to read, right? A lot of people have trouble reading cursive, especially if the clerk did not have very good handwriting. And of course, many younger people today cannot read cursive because they're not teaching in the schools anymore, which I don't think is a great idea, but they're not. So for them, having some sort of transcript is extremely important. Another thing is it will preserve the original record, right? So if people just have a transcript that they can easily look at, whether it's online or it's a paper copy, they may not need to see the original. Um, Also, if you wanted to, you could monetize it. You could sell printed transcripts to researchers. So people still prefer paper. Maybe they, even if you have it online, they'd rather have a paper copy. So you could have paper copies made and just sell them. Oftentimes, I know there have been some towns that work closely, say, with their local historical society in doing this. Of course, like I said, you can publish it on the website where it would be searchable. So if you put up a searchable PDF, people could just hit Control F and just look for keywords and names and go through and see if they can find the information they're looking for. And if you wanted to, you could actually create a name index as you're transcribing the record. Okay, so let's take a quick look at an example of transcription. Now, I hope folks can read this okay here. So this is an old, what they call old town book. Since, as I said, there aren't many New York records online, this is one from the small town of Hardwick, Vermont, up in northern Vermont. And you can see here, there's on the right, you can see here there's a town meeting, and it's got the page number here stuff. So um, as far as transcription goes, let me give you an example of how you'd want to do this. Because with transcriptions, it's also important. One of the rules is to not just provide the information, transcribe it, but you also want to make an effort to make the transcription look as much like the original record in its format, and not just the information. So you can see here, town meeting is indented with a dash here. Here's the page number, right? That was all the way at the right, and it's underlined with a little parentheses there. And then here are, basic information of what it was saying, all the inhabitants of the town of Hardwick, et cetera, et cetera. Now you come down here and you can see where it says on the last Monday of March and put illegible, right? Because I couldn't read it. And that's perfectly fine to do if the transcriber just cannot figure out what a word is. You can put illegible there at 3 o'clock in the morning, blah, blah, blah. And then you see here first with the numeral one, ST. So if we go back, right, again, if you can see this well enough, um, that's basically what it looked like, the original, right? So just remember, if you're going to create transcriptions, to try to follow that format. Now, the one problem with transcriptions, somebody sees the word illegible, they're probably going to want to still look at the original. Um, but again, there are still ways of protecting the original by reformatting and stuff that we'll talk about in a moment. So you're probably thinking to yourself, wow, Dave, this all sounds like great stuff. I'd love to do this, but we really don't have the resources. Um, Now, believe it or not, there are loads of people out there who really love history and genealogy, and a lot of them would, not mind volunteering to help you with this. So, where would you find volunteers? The obviously one would be an historical or genealogical society, right? If you go and you explain what you want to do, they could put out a call volunteers to their membership and say, hey, anybody want to help I don't know, the town of Islip, um, make transcripts of their old minute books, and you'll probably get a decent number of people who would volunteer. Um, Department of the Aging. Many counties have a Department of the Aging. They often place these people, to either do volunteer work, and sometimes they even get paid to do this kind of work. So talk to your Department of the Aging. Um, a lot of counties too, and even municipalities may have a volunteer services, or there may be um, private institutions that have volunteer services. A lot of times retirees looking for something to do. And again, if they really like history and genealogy, they might be more than willing to do this. And what I did here is I gave you an example, again, going to the Family Search genealogy website. And you can see here, since they're a free service, they don't actually hire people to do the indexing on their website. It's all done by volunteers. And you can see here, when I created this, they had over 100 projects in 20 countries, and people will actually go to the website and sign up and volunteer to do indexing, create transcriptions, things like that. So, don't panic. Volunteers should be relatively easy to find. So, another way, of course, of making things easier on yourself could be to digitize records, make copies, and distribute them. So, of course, digital imaging is by far the most popular one today. And it's probably the best one for access because it's very easy to use. You could put the images on your website, things like that. Just a word of caution, if you do start imaging your records, please follow the New York State Archives imaging guidelines. Then there's microfilm, which is, still around. It's not the easiest to use, but if you want to reformat your records and distribute it to other people, microfilm still works. Usually, in cases like this with your old historic records, you'd want to follow um, what's called research library group standards, which we'll talk about in a second. And then in certain situations, maybe photocopying. So let's take a look first at imaging. So imaging really is the best access tool, right? It's easy to use. I think everybody today knows how to use imaging. It's relatively easy to index to, right? And then you can provide that remote access via the web. And also, if you wanted to, you could either put it up for free or you could put it behind a paywall, right? So, say if you're spending X amount of money doing this and you want to make a little bit of that money back, you could charge, a few dollars to give people access to it or perhaps to download it, print it, things like that. Um, but imaging can present some challenges. So you would have to maintain these records and the system that they reside in. You'd want what's called a migration plan and really commit yourself to constantly upgrading the system as technology changes, right? Keep upgrading that hardware, keep upgrading the software so you don't lose these records to obsolescence. Also, make sure that you make multiple backups, store them, off-site, preferably in the cloud, things like that. So your other options, oops, I forgot. I wanted to show you an example of this actually first before we look at the other options. So Dutchess County in the lower Hudson Valley, they've got this collection of mostly old court records, but there are some other records in there. Um, they have this sort of quaint, colorful name. They call it the Ancient Documents Collection. And about a decade ago, maybe a little longer, they started digitizing and indexing all these records. And they've gotten a few grants from the state archives to help them with this. And again, you can see here they created a pretty detailed index to these records. So if you're looking for court records, for instance, so you have the name of the party, what municipality they lived in, the type of record, you could put in the offense, the year, and even if you know the document number, you can put it in to find it. So again, I used a very common name, Smith, to see what kind of hits I would get. And I found this one. Um, this is an indictment, I think, just to show you as an example here. So once you find what you're looking for, you click on that link and it actually just brings up an image. So now, for the folks at Dutchess County, even though they're putting, again, a lot of time and effort and money into doing this, it's so much easier for their staff. Before that, people would come to them, request records, they would have to help them find it. Very time consuming. Now people can just go and do this on their own. And from talking to county officials, I know that they actually get researchers from all around the world using this very, very valuable collection of old records from Dutchess County. So microfilm and photocopies, again, microfilm not so popular today. Still has its uses though. And again, there's something called Research Library Group Standards, which creates what's called a role of preservation microfilm. If you're going to do that, I would encourage you to follow those standards and make multiple copies then to deposit at a library or historical society. What you do with microfilm, you create what's called a silver master, silver gelatin master, and then what's called diazo copies. Okay, user copies. So you keep the master in storage under good environmental conditions, and then those copies you can send out to maybe your local historical society, your local library, distribute them around, and when people contact you about doing research and using various records, you could say, hey, go to the local library. We have everything there on microfilm, and you can just search through yourself. Now, photocopies only use as a last resort and also be very careful. So if you wanted to say make a copy of an old minute book, um, make sure it's in pretty good shape. If it's kind of brittle, things might break off. I would really discourage you from doing that. But if the record's in pretty good shape and you're just going to do it once, you should be fine. But again, I would definitely try to look at microfilming and imaging first if that's possible. So relocating records. Okay, so it's best to relocate, copies as we were just talking about. So microfilm, maybe if you made transcriptions, you can, send those transcriptions to other people. So one place, of course, is your local library, right? Most libraries have what they call a local history and genealogy room. And you can just send those copies of those records there. And what's great about that is libraries, by their very nature, are research facilities, right? Your town hall, village hall, not so much, but um, these places are actually have trained staff. They've got the proper facilities, a good place to send it. Same thing with historical societies, but again, only if they have the proper facilities for people to use it. And in some cases, you could send it to another local government. I know there are cases where counties will provide this service for their municipalities. Putnam County comes to mind. I know a lot of the local governments there may send their historical records there for safekeeping. And also, Putnam County's got the staff, right? They've got research staff there at their Archives and Records Center, and they can help people access those records. So, relocating original records, it's best not to do this. Now, there can be some cases where it might make sense. So, for instance, um, your records are in danger in their current storage conditions, or it's very difficult for you to provide access. So, I have seen a couple of situations where the local historical society had very good state-of-the-art facilities where the municipality, the records really weren't in the best storage conditions. So, physically transferring those records to the historical society in very limited cases might make sense. Also, for some municipalities, providing proper access is really difficult for them. They may not have a research space. I've been to lots of towns and village halls, and sometimes they can be very small, very cramped, and there's just not a really good place for people to do research. Um, Now, here's the thing. If you were going to relocate these records, okay, the originals, first you do need to get permission from the state archives. We may actually want to go and look at these facilities, talk to you more about it, exactly why do you want to do it, what would be the advantages, and if it makes sense, we may approve it. And also, keep one thing in mind too. Legally, right, the law says you cannot give away any record that has a permanent retention period in the local government Schedule 1, the LGS 1. So what you'd want to do in a case like that is have a deposit agreement. And if there's cases where you can actually give away a record, say chattel mortgages comes to mind. They're not technically permanent records, although they do um, have a lot of research value to them. You can actually give those away. And in that case, you'd use something called a deed of gift. So I'm just going to show you an example. Now, here's an example deposit agreement. And in this one, it's setting up a scenario where the local school district is giving the records to the town because they cannot provide access to it. So what the school district is doing in this case is they're depositing the records with the town. They're not legally giving them away. They're just giving them physical custody. And you can see here in the agreement that the town agrees to protect and preserve to the extent feasible, the record. So basically, what it says is, hey, the town's going to take good care of these records for us. They're going to make them accessible. And by the way, these are still legally our records. We can take them back at any time. Um, so if you to read through this agreement, you would see this. Now, the state archives, you can get copies of these from the state archives. You can contact your records advisor officer to get a copy of the sample deposit agreement. And so if you find yourself in this situation, you really do want to make sure that you dot your I's and cross all your T's and make sure everything's legal and up, because what you don't want to do is somehow lose, legal custody of your records. And also, if you're going to do something like that, you really want to make sure that the people you're giving them to are responsible, they have the proper facilities to do this. So, and again, a deed of gift. what this happens is not only are you physically giving up the record, okay, so um, whoever you give it to will have physical custody, but also they'll have legal custody. It's now legally their record, and they can do with it as they please. You no longer have any say over what happens to the record. And again, the state archives, if you ever wanted to do this, does have copies. So, one decision you might want to make is what kind of research services can you or are you willing to provide for the public? Um, it could be on-site only. You could try to provide remote research. That is somebody, say from California, contacts you and says, "Hey, can I get copies from this record or that record that you have?" Is that something that you want to do? Or you could you could do both. So for on-site research, first be prepared. You'd want to request that researchers provide a date and time that they plan to visit you. Try to discourage people from just walking in. Require that they request the records beforehand. They should tell you, okay, these are exactly the records that I want to look at when I come here. Now, this is assuming, of course, you've done things like, create a holdings list or some finding aids so they can find this information. Beforehand, you'd probably want to locate and pull the records, right? So they're all ready. You don't have to go scrambling when the person comes in. And also for security reason, keep a log of all the researchers and have them sign in and actually sign out as well, exactly what times they were there. Just in case something does go missing, you may have an idea of who took it. Uh, and provide a dedicated research area if you can. You'd want to make sure that, it's clean, it's comfortable, it's well lit. Um, but extremely important, you want to make sure that you can observe the person and look at them the whole time they're there. Again, unfortunately, thefts of, old records is not that uncommon, or even people defacing them, maybe ripping out a page, marking something up with a pen. You just want to make sure people don't do things like that. Um, and also for security reasons, just provide only one or two records at a time so you can just keep track of all those records. Again, make sure that nothing goes missing. If you give them 10 records at a time, you may get a little confused of exactly what you gave them, how much. Um, and if you can't keep track of them, they're more likely to disappear on you. Okay, so that's on-site research. What if you want to do remote research? Okay, so if somebody contacts you, first thing you want to do is ask the researcher to be specific. Years back when I worked for Albany County, sometimes we would get these requests through the mail. People would say things like, well, my great great grandfather lived there back in the 1880s. Could you please send me all the information you have about them? Well, of course, that's way too broad, right? And so we'd have to contact the person back and say, hey, here's a list of our holdings. We'd send them a pamphlet and say, please let us know exactly what record series you'd like us to look in. Um, Refer them to the list of holdings or a finding aid. Then estimate how long the research will take. Now, if you are going to charge for your research time, give them an idea of how much it's going to cost. So you estimate that it's going to take 2 hours to do that research. You're charging $15 an hour. So tell them it's going to cost you approximately $30. Have them agree to it. Uh, and if you are going to collect money, do it beforehand. And tell them, as soon as we get the money, we'll start the research. Also make clear that the costs are for the research time, regardless if the record is found. Okay. In the early days of genealogy research, I spent money for searches that turned up no record, but I still had to pay for it because I was paying for the researcher's time, not for the record itself. And then you could decide if you do want to charge something for copies, but that would be up to you. So, other options. What you could do is you could compile a list of genealogists and researchers. So you could do this by talking to your local historian, contact your local historical genealogical society. They may know of people who do, research for a fee. And also ask your local library. They may have more information too. You could consult websites like, say, the Board of Certified Genealogists and the Association of Professional Genealogists. And you can see here, um, I actually provided their website. So if you want to go and look at them, you can. So I'm going to show you an example now. Again, going back to our friends at Dutchess County, they actually did this for their researchers. They've got a list of genealogists who specialize in Dutchess County, Hudson Valley research. So people could just go through, contact them, and then say, hey, how much would you charge to go to Dutchess County and do this research for me? So, on the list of other possible resources might want to provide to people is the New York State Department of Health. They're the ones who have all the vital records. And of course, many of you have those vital records as well. But in some cases, you might want to just direct them to the Department of Health. Um, Ancestry New York, people can find this through the New York State Archives website. The archives set up an agreement with Ancestry.com, okay, the big genealogy website that I'm sure you've all heard of at least. Um, and what it is if you are a New Yorker, okay, you could look at all New York State records for free. So how it works is they know whether your IP address is from New York. You do have to sign up for an account, and if you go and do searches and somebody comes up in a New York State record, you have access to that for free. Okay. The New York State Archives, we have local government microfilm. So I'm going to show you an example of that in one moment. Um, and again, your local historical society or local library. Okay, so it's good to give people, say, links on your website to all of these places. The local government microfilm. Now, some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the fact that the State Archives has a grants program, the Local Government Records Management Improvement Fund. And when it started back in 1990, there was a rule that if a local government created microfilm with a grant, they had to have an extra copy made and send it to the New York State Archives here in Albany. And we still have a lot of this film. We discontinued this rule in 2000, but you know, a researcher, if you send them to this site, and this person also may be, if they're coming, say, from the West Coast to the East Coast to do research, and they might be stopping here in Albany to use the state archives, it would be good for them to know that we actually might have microfilm from the town that they're looking in. So you can see here, here's a list. Of microfilm from towns in, I believe these are all in Saratoga County. Yes, they're all from Saratoga County. And if you click on one of these, it'll give you more information about what kind of records we have for that particular town. So as I said in the beginning, we're going to tell you where to get more help. So one thing would be to talk to your records advisor officer. If you decide that you want to undertake a project to make your historical records more accessible, um, they're an excellent resource to start with. And also consult publications on the State Archives website. We've got some really good ones. Managing imaging projects, if you're going to get into imaging. Local government records, useful and family history research. This one was just updated this year. It's much more extensive than the old version, so I'd encourage you to take a look at that and fundamentals of managing local government archival records, and take a look at our website because that's just an example of a few of them that you can look at. And then we've got lots of recorded webinars too. Introduction to historical records for local governments. And if you're going to take an inventory of your records to start off, we have conducting an inventory of paper records, which you'd probably find quite helpful. And I think this brings us to the end. Yes. So thanks for joining us today. I gave you some contact information here. If you want to contact me directly, there's my email. If you just want to contact the state archives, there's our general email account, recmanagement@niacid.gov, and that is the state archives main telephone line. So, having said all that, Rich, it looked like we had some questions popping in.
Yes, we had a couple questions here, Dave. Take a look here. So we had a question. Uh, we had Jennifer early on pointed out the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society digitized New York website. She put the URL in there. And we had a question here from Larry. It's more of a comment. It says the Rochester, New York Genealogical Society has scanned many records for historians in Monroe County. They have been given to the historians, and we have been very careful to get written permission from the appropriate authorities.
Oh, that's great. It's good to hear. Yeah, and also, I know the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society is also working on a big indexing project right now to index all the property records, deed records from New York State that are on Family Search right now. So again, that's just another example of the fact that it should be relatively easy to find volunteers to help you with this stuff. Because, like I said, somebody really likes history and genealogy, chances are they're going to be willing to give you some help.
Okay, and we also had a couple of links here posted by our colleague Sarah, who is also in the panel. She just put down different links here, but contact or how to contact your local government advisory services. Um, she's got the digital imaging guidelines she put in here. Let's see what else. Yes, and let's see, we had a question here from Donna. Uh, if you search the National Archives, NARA, can you do research for free? For example, Ancestry.
There are a lot of free resources on the National Archives website. Ancestry, though, is a pay site. But you will find if you look around a lot, there's lots of great free resources. So, like I said, Family Search, which has gone around the world, and originally they created a ton of microfilm or records. They've actually digitized them all. The one downside with some of Family Search is not everything is indexed, so you just have to browse through certain records, which could be a bit time consuming, but they are there if you're willing to put in the time. You mentioned the National Archives. They have a lot of good free stuff. There are other sites which have a certain amount of free stuff. Daughters of the American Revolution. And as I pointed out today, various, counties, cities will, post records to their website. So, just going out and Googling is is a good thing, and visiting municipal and county websites really can pay off.
Yes, and I just want to add to Gary, I'm sorry, rather Larry, he posted the URL for the New York State Library's New York State Library, which has got the Ancestry link, how to get that uh, access to that.
Okay, great.
Um, yes, also, so Daniel here said, could you share the link for the catalog of local government microfilm?
Yeah, we might be. I don't know if it's Sarah. You think you could find that one quick, or we could send it out. If we can't do it right now, we could send that out to an email, a follow-up email to everybody who registered, perhaps.
Yeah, why don't you send an email to the address that, hold on, I can't talk and type at the same time, that I'm going to throw in the chat, and we'll get back to you on that, okay?
Okay, great. Thanks, Sarah.
Mhm.
Okay, and we have a question here from Jennifer. With the important interplay with town historians and clerks, are there any planned updates to the historians' publications?
That's a good question. I know we've talked about it a bit in recent years, but yeah, that's something we should put back on our radar. So thanks for bringing that up.
Okay, see, yep, and Sarah did post in the email link to rec management at NICED.gov if anybody is looking for any additional resources. Okay, and see, we also have another question here. I think it's from Jennifer. I'm just going to go put this on here. Yes, building Doris's Vital Records Digitization Initiative. Are there procedures / best practices or guidance targeted to small municipalities who might be interested in sharing historical VR?
So historical vital records.
Right.
You can share as long as they're pre 1880. You could, yeah, you could post those on your website. The state doesn't care if it's before 1880. It's just after 1880 you cannot post anything. Um, so you know, like I said, which is unfortunate, but and if you are more interested in doing something like that, I do think the best thing would probably be to contact your records advisory officer, you know, and he could, you know, give you some advice, walk you through the process, talk to you about exactly what you want to do. So I think that would be your best starting point.
Okay, I don't see any other questions here at this point. Do have a couple of minutes left if anybody wants to send us a question. And I just might want to add too that if there's anybody out there watching that's in a large group, there's more than one person. If you could type that into the chat, that'll give us a better idea. So if there's say there's two of you or three or four, um, in terms of a better idea of attendance. But if it's just yourself, that's okay. We can count. We've got a good count for that. And other than that, I just want to remind folks that this recording will be available at the New York State Archives website, as well as at the New York State Archives YouTube page. And we will be sending out notification when the recording is available through our constant contact um, uh, service, which is the same way that everybody got the information for for this webinar. So as soon as that's available, and we usually have the recording available in a day or two. So yeah, I don't see any other questions, Dave.
Okay, well, great. And again, folks, thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you found this helpful. And again, don't be shy. If you know you've got more questions, like I said, you could just reach out to us, and we'd be happy to help you.
All right, goodbye, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.